We are now continuing part 1 of our lessons on an introduction to assessment. If you have not seen the first part, they are part of the same playlist, but that would have been labeled as assessment 1.01, and this is 1.02. And this portion is a focus on how students learn. So when students are learning, they will often find on an assessment that some questions are harder than others. And why? Generally speaking, level of student preparation has a big impact on it. A student who studied hard and has been understanding versus a student who has not been understanding, didn't study, maybe didn't show up for class, they will have differences. But overall, when you give all the students in class a well-written assessment and say which were the hardest questions, which were the easiest questions, you'll find a lot of agreement. And why is that? That's because different types of assessment items require different types of mental processing. Some are straight recall definition, some involve a lot of steps, a lot of combinations. These could be happening. And again, I'm talking about well-written items. I'm not talking about things that are difficult because they are poorly worded or vague or anything along those lines. Now, these types of mental processing are mostly hierarchical. There is some overlap in levels. And there are a number of taxonomies that have been proposed and presented. All have their strengths, all have their weaknesses. I'm going to focus on Bloom's taxonomy because it is still the most popular, largely because it is one of the first. And that's one of the ones that get explicit instruction at university. There's been a little bit of a lag getting others introduced to teachers as they are training, partly because local school boards still tend to evaluate with Bloom's taxonomy, so that's the one universities focus on, and you get this feedback loop where the new teachers are preparing, or the new teachers are being prepared for the old system, because that is what is currently in place. Now, that taxonomy itself has 6 levels. The first level is knowledge. This level is essentially a level a parrot can achieve. This is about knowing what something is. It's about being able to cite the definition of a term in the back of the textbook, but you don't necessarily have to know what it all means. I can find a 6th grader who might be able to memorize the definition of a term in a calculus book just by measuring or memorizing word after word. That doesn't mean they understand what those words mean in that order. That's the second level, comprehension. Then you really start to understand. So if we were thinking about this in terms of driving a car, the knowledge level can tell you what a car is, what it does. Comprehension is when you could sit in that car, start it, drive it around a parking lot. The application level is where now you can get in that car and drive it from a specific point to a specific destination safely and adhering to the traffic laws. Analysis is where you start to think about it in terms of multiple routes and try to figure out which is the optimal route. Synthesis is where you start to put multiple aspects together. So this would not just be one skill. This would be looking at 2 seemingly unrelated skills and figure out how to combine them. This would be understanding chocolate and understanding peanut butter and putting together Reese's peanut butter cups or something along those levels. And evaluation is where you can start to look at others and critique them, figure out what their strengths, what their weaknesses are. And that's beyond the analysis level. There's some of that in the analysis level, but evaluation is where you can really start to go through arguments. So not just looking at cut and dried right and wrong. Analysis level evaluation of someone else's work is when you are marking a math word problem and someone makes a mistake in their computation, and you can spot that mistake. That's analysis. Evaluation would be more like hearing arguments from multiple sides in a court case and coming up with a fair decision for how they combine. So as we get further down this hierarchy from knowledge to evaluation, the questions will seem more difficult to students. And when I say it's mostly hierarchical, there's a lot of arguments for, say, synthesis and evaluation to be in the other order. And there are cases where students achieve evaluation before they achieve synthesis. This is not strictly hierarchical. Those two, if anything, are more parallel, but the early ones do come in a hierarchy. It's also important to note that synthesis and evaluation require students to create the information or the ideas on their own. So this is not something that can be scored with multiple choice or other machine scored tests. They have to be able to produce the content individually. But we'll get to that more when we get to our next section, which is on the types of assessment items.